Good morning. Hope that's working. Good morning. I'm David Hochman from Orchestra BioMed, and I've got the honor and pleasure of moderating a discussion between these two esteemed gentlemen. We've got Howard Levin, one of the most prolific inventors in our industry, and we've got Chris Cleary, who recently shed some major responsibilities at a big company that I think we're all familiar with. So I want to get things started because late last year, we saw the approval after a long journey of renal denervation for Medtronic. I think Jeff Martha cited a 17-year journey to that major event, and we're all looking forward to what comes next. I thought we could start with you, Howard, because you began that journey actually more than 17 years ago, and maybe you could tell me about how you and your partner Mark started thinking about taking device technology and interventional procedures into the treatment of hypertension.
Great, thanks a lot. Really appreciate that. So we started off by it was a heart failure play to start. And we were trying to hyperperfuse the kidney in order to fake it to believe that it should make urine. But when we got there and we're doing it, in order to do it to start, we had to cut the renal artery to put a catheter in because we're doing it surgically. And we're getting tons and tons and tons of urine. When we then went back and did it endovascularly, we were getting much less, and we were trying to figure out why. And then all of a sudden, one day it said, you cut the artery, you cut the nerves, et cetera. And we started looking back in the literature, et cetera, and we found that, lo and behold, there were different reasons to believe that the renal nerves controlled the input to the kidney and blood pressure. And there were three things we were trying to shop it for. And this goes to the agony. The agony was we had a deck for hypertension, we had a deck for heart failure, and we had a deck for end-stage or chronic renal failure. And depending on who was crazy enough to listen to us at the time, we would pull out that particular deck and shop it. So we had the first clinical study we were doing, and we're doing it in China. Well, another piece of the agony was nobody was listening to us because we had preclinical data. Then we had one patient that we were able to, for a totally different clinical reason, under CT guidance, put a needle in, inject lidocaine into gyrotous fascia, and block the nerves. And we saw a reduction in blood pressure and increase in urine output. And we then took the x-ray of that one thing, and now everybody said, oh, well, you have human data. So I was saying, what can you do? But the bottom line is that, what do they say? Invention favors the prepared mind type thing. And it's just, it was a really hard slog early on. Like I said, 3 decks, 3 different people. I still have a letter from J&J saying, no, we will not take it off your hands for $500,000.
So that birthed, I think, a whole field, and we can talk more about it. Our group was one of the groups that got all excited about, by around 2008, 2009, you had a body of clinical evidence. It led to a big transaction at Medtronic that predated you, Chris. I think you can't take either credit or responsibility for in a transaction that really woke up the industry. And I think maybe you can comment on dynamics. But 2014, you take your position at Medtronic. I think it was right around the same time as some other data came out related to this technology that was a little surprising and maybe created some agony at Medtronic. Can you talk a little bit about that?
In between my offer letter date and my starting date is when it didn't meet the endpoint. So yeah, that was like a January 2014 thing. And it obviously caused a big stir, right? In 2011, it was $800 million up front, I think, and at the time it was the largest amount paid for a pre-revenue company. So that's part of the. It's funny. We're talking about Agony and Ecstasy, but the Ecstasy is like a future thing at this point still for Ardian. But it was a lot of trouble for a lot of people. But we were sitting there with a huge upfront. You had Hawkins trumpeting the deal on CNBC shortly before Omar came in. And then you've got the clinical guys looking at it saying, we're going to need to run a trial that gets a label that can pay back that kind of a upfront in the development that we had to run on top of that. And, I think when you begin looking at all the pressure that comes in for a high growth market, big TAM, big price, you start to layer on, different elements of, the agony here, right? It put pressure on the trial. They probably went for too big a label. They tried to do too much with the trial, really twice. And, the whole time there was this great signal that no one really had any doubts about. People, I think from the beginning looked at it and said, this is good, right? This is going to help a lot of people. And that's the thing you got to kind of grab onto is the core belief, right? Is this the right thing to do? Does it help patients? Is there a point where, I don't care, I'm indifferent to some degree to the expense of it? And there are products that I think meet that criteria. They can't all hit that. But something like Ardian, I think, really did hit it. And it was, it engendered the response that we've had so far. Ran a second trial. We're pursuing labels in 3 major geographies. And, we're determined to be in it all the way through reimbursement.
Talk a little bit about that transaction, though. And you and I were talking earlier. The dynamics around how decisions get made to take on pre-revenue assets at a company like Medtronic or any of the strategics, I think is something that this audience should be really interested in, because most of this audience is entrepreneurs eventually building towards an exit. Talk about Ardian or other examples around which Medtronic bought pre-revenue companies. And Bernard talked about yesterday, needing to pivot and adjust when sometimes things don't work out. What have you learned from both the decision to go, decision not to go, and how to deal with an Ardian or something that doesn't go exactly as planned?
I can talk about 12 because I have direct experience on that. But, for 12, we had, a bunch of assets that kind of went on the market at the same time. Everyone decided that mitral replacement was a must-have asset for structural heart. And you had 4, sometimes 5 companies that were looking at all the properties, and they basically all traded within about a 4-month period. And, in general, you were paying hundreds of millions of dollars upfront with, revenue earnouts for companies that had 5 patients. So the first thing you have to do is say, is this an existential asset that I've got to have, right? And if it is, then you pay up, and this is one of the long-term projects that you're going to fund. And then you have to say, okay, what's it cost? And our estimate for 12 was probably $500 million to do a US, a European, and ultimately a China trial, where we knew we wanted to bring the product out globally. But in the intervening period, we had a hard time with our delivery, getting it down to a French catheter that was the right size. So we basically had to do a back to the drawing board on the delivery design. And, that's kind of like spend a lot of money, back it up, spend a lot of money. And, that's the nature of it, right? And if you're in it, then while you're making those decisions where it's an incremental $200, $300 million, you either have to get more money or cut something else. And you're making a lot of capital allocation decisions at at the high level in the company, trying to figure out which are the 5, 7 programs that are must fund. And the nice thing about Ardian is it stayed in a must fund category. And certainly for mitral valve replacement, it stayed in that category too for Medtronic.
I want to come back to you on some things that have worked out really well. But I want to come back to you, Howard, on idea generation, because I think you can speak to something that a lot of people appreciate, which is, I think, one of the ecstatic moments when you really come to a discovery or an insight that you can think can birth a new therapy. Talk about that process, but also to Chris's points, how do you and your colleagues think about from idea to how do we actually see this in patients, and how do we bring this to a value inflection point where a Medtronic or another strategic can get engaged?
Well, I think that value inflection point is very important. So maybe 10, 15 years ago, you could get a Series A with, a couple pigs and a provisional. And now it's getting to the point with venture capital that, you almost have to have 12 months of clinical data, and there's some number of patients to get the Series A. Whatever the right answer is, from the ideation point of view, it turns out to be reasonably the same thing. What you're trying to do is to understand, and we didn't to start, and that was sort of a downfall for us. Our first company was a company called CHF Solutions, and it was a great clinical thing. It only cost us $9 million to go from back of the napkin through 510K, and we thought that everybody and their grandmother would use it. And I remember that we were at this coming out party at like a heart failure society or something like that, and there were tons of people in the paint, and there was this, walked up to this woman who was the head of heart failure at UCSD at the time. And she said, "Oh, I'm going to use this all the time." I said, "Oh, that's really great. How often?" She said, "Oh, at least twice a month." And I'm thinking, we plan on twice a day. But so the ideation process has to take in nowadays, where it has to start with an unmet clinical need, but it has to be a real market to start. And everybody gets enamored with their ideas, and part of the agony is realizing that what you thought of originally wasn't actually what's going to be the right thing to do. So you have to be flexible enough to change what you want to, your approach to something. But that's, and I wish I had a right answer for this, but it's also, when do you quit? When do you give up and say, well, this idea is just not going to make it, and move on? So it's not just ideating it, it's actually trying to know when to actually push really hard and change, or when to kill it. I don't know if that answers.
Well, I think that in killing it, I think that technology has birthed 2 other companies now that are well-funded in pursuing different indications around the core technology. So there still seems to be a lot of potential with it. We come back to you, Chris, on something I think that's worked really well for Medtronic and has had a big impact. Another big deal that I think predated your arrival at Medtronic, but you saw it mature, was CoreValve, which I think is a great story of success, but also early adoption, big investment, but big impact, and continues to be a key asset. Can you tell us about how your observations in that program versus others?
Well, we paid for it twice, right? We paid $800 million to, Antoine and everybody, and then we paid another $800 million to Edwards on IP.
Do you have any extra left over?
No, no, and I'm not even there, so I can't really help you. But look, it's still worth it, right? I mean, the thing is, it happened a lot later than we thought, so the revenue curve was like that, and the revenue curve we got was a lot further kicked out. But it went up higher, and it's been a principal driver for like year-over-year revenue growth for Medtronic over a 10-year period. So you really can't complain about it, right? And we wish we were in number 1, not number 2 position on it. So all these products have some limitations in terms of the addressable portion of the the TAM that the product can get you. But it's been a fabulous deal for us, and you look around and say, okay, what are the really big products that are in medtech that have that profile, that take a lot longer, but they're worth the wait? Okay, MitraClip, no one thought MitraClip was going to turn into a $1 billion plus market, right? It took probably 10 years longer than anybody thought it did. No way that was the deal model when it came out. It's a failed deal model, but it's a good product. Libre, right? Nobody thought that thing was, that took forever to figure out how to make that product. But now it's like 80% of the year-over-year growth for Abbott when you kind of look at it. So there's a lot of products like this. Watchman, third panel to finally clear it. And there's just no way that people anticipated that it would take that long. And yet it's a $2 billion market growing in the 20s.
But it's really interesting what he's saying. So we had the original IP on MitraClip and did the original design before we spun it out and sold it off. The the issue is that so in the ideation process, you can either be, what'd you say, it's one of the 64?
64 startups that followed you into the renal denervation journey
Right.
at one point.
And there were only
I'm glad we demurred, but
potential. Yeah, there are only like 3 potential acquirers is the problem. And so, which side do you sit on? Do you sit on the fast follower side? And some people are very successful sitting on the fast follower side. Do you sit on the early ideation side? And if you're going to sit on the early ideation side, do you do pie in the sky that's going to take 10, 20 years and require a strategic to have enough horsepower to be able to, go through all those different market development processes? And, as an early entrepreneur, at least we never thought of that. We never worried about that. We said, this is a great idea, whatever. And we had a big failure. One of them was called Sibium. And it was a great idea. It was a ablation of the carotid body in the neck to treat hypertension or to treat heart failure, right? Because it reduced sympathetic tone. And the problem is that it would have been a great fast follower in hypertension. It had the same actual clinical reduction in blood pressure that, renal denervation had. And it was differentiated. But the problem is, Simplicity 3 came out and killed the field for that amount of time, and we couldn't raise money on it. So, you can have a good idea and whatever, and it just doesn't, you're just at the wrong place at the wrong time.
So clinical trials, clinical outcomes from trials play a big role in all of the products that we've talked about, the successes, the challenges. At Orchestra, we talk all the time about unknown knowables, things that maybe you could have known, but you're only going to learn the hard way sometimes. Chris, Howard, talk about the journey of developing that late stage clinical evidence, how it relates to, in your case, Howard, the early clinical evidence, and what you think is most important these days to increase the probability of success. Because, and just going back to your comments on Watchman, Chris, one of the fascinating stories there is what people don't appreciate is how close it came to not actually being realized to the market that we all see evolving today.
And I think there are similarities, but there are some differences. In early stage stuff, if you're trying to push something that's differentiated enough from the existing thing that people don't actually know, can't hang their hat on something that it worked somewhere else, then you're developing a better way. The only way that I've been able to explain it, and I don't know if this is great words, but therapeutic magic. When you're doing something early on, you have to show something that's so much better than what exists out there that people look at it and go, or whether it's obvious to the most casual observer, right, that this is a great thing. In the absence of that, it's really, really hard to fund something new. And I think it's equally hard in different ways when you get to Chris's stage, the later stage, to do those phase 3 trials or phase 2, phase 3 trials. And because you're trying to get labeling and you're trying to get a big enough market that it's worth it. But, the problem is a lot of times to start, you have to narrow, and it becomes I would imagine, a dichotomy for a company like Medtronic.
Yeah, look, the stuff that we think about are, like you said, can it be the new standard of care, right? So, does it develop a market because people want to use it on a priority basis over the previous standard of care? That's a great leading indicator. Then how big is the market? What do you think the growth would be? And what does the reimbursement look like? And then it's like, what number are we going to be to market? Will we be first? Will we be second or third? And we've done a lot of stats where you look at it and say, look, it kind of usually goes something like 55, 30, and 15 for player number 1, 2, and 3. When you get into a mature market with 3 equivalent products, doesn't matter when they come. The mature run rate on that thing is that the first market entrant, if they've got equivalent technology or even a little worse technology, hangs on to almost 2/3 of the share, right? And when you look at the stats, and there's a lot of data around that, unfortunately. Being in there first matters. So you can't just chase reimbursement with your label. You've got to chase timing, and sometimes you've got to pay for time. And you and I, David, have had this conversation a lot. Like, that's kind of really what we're doing with the program that Medtronic and Orchestra have together. You're really paying for time. How do you pull the introduction date for something that's like interesting forward, so that you can guarantee that you're the first market offering with a great product that's out there? Because that's what it's worth. It's worth about double of what it's worth to be number 2 into the market.
Well, with the pain we've talked about in terms of financing and financing these ambitious programs, the time dilation that can occur if you get it wrong, talk more about what you started at Medtronic in terms of thinking differently about how to finance, how to share risk. We've done something interesting, but I know you've done other work where you're trying to get to that point of advantage, but stretch and not stretch the P&L, also the resources at Medtronic to be able to do more.
Yeah, look, the dynamic that I was faced with, 16, 17, was we had 7%, maybe 6% at that point of sales that we dedicated to R&D, and it wasn't enough. And then the programs that we had that were under development, like Guardian, like 12, they eat up all the oxygen. The robot, our 780G program for diabetes. So when you kind of take the first couple $100 million each of that out of it, you don't have enough left for kind of ordinary course R&D. So I looked at what pharma did, where they, I thought in my head they had outsourced R&D to third parties. And what they had really done was with Cleary, which was a fund that ultimately got bought by Blackstone. They did like 23 deals over a 5-year period, 18 of which Cleary did. And fundamentally, they came up with a structured way to kind of give you off-balance sheet money that you could use to offset your R&D expenses so that it kept it off your P&L. And what you wound up paying back was a multiple of their investment, but it was worth it because you were bringing products to market that you wouldn't have made it if you didn't do the deal. So would you pay someone 3x their investment to get a product to market and have a lot of revenue versus 0 revenue? And that's the balance that you've got it. So you kind of feel bad because you're not paying 100, you're paying 300 for it. But at the same time, if you don't do it, you get nothing. So that was the operating theory that we had to do. It took me a year and a half to get people over the knee-jerk sticker shock of the private equity returns that you had to come out of pocket for. But they were all future royalties that went out 10 years. And when you looked at the overarching percentage of the royalty, it was like mid-single digits. So finally, people kind of came on board. And since they initiated the program, Medtronic's done publicly probably a couple of $1 billion of that stuff. And and these are products that would not have seen the light of day if we hadn't done it. We've done one with Intrepid where we pulled the introduction date for the next version of it forward by a couple of years. And like I said, that really matters.
Time and money. We had dinner last night, Howard. To Chris's point, which is certainly near and dear to my heart, thinking differently about how to create connection and collaboration with strategics. Mm-hmm. You have you've continued this work. You have an accelerator. You're doing new ideas. Where do you see today, with opportunities of thinking differently, ways to bring the resources to bear to accelerate a new idea? How to engage strategics, how to think differently than the traditional models that have become challenging, let's say, to advance ideas independently?
Yeah, I think the traditional models are very difficult today. To go to the standard seed, Series A, B, C, the problem is there's not enough early stage investors to do the early stage stuff, and there's more late stage investors, but everybody is looking for returns that may or may not be possible to do. I mean, I think, organizations like yours, which have a very novel business model, or being able to work with strategics early on, strategics, and I may be wrong about this, but strategics know to a certain degree what they want, but yes, you can come up with really novel stuff, but like the StratBed program that you guys have, or Medtronic has, is actually very attractive. To go and find something that is already within their strategic goals that you could help, add to or work on, or if you have something that fits into that area, thing. So I know this was not a very useful answer, but the issue is that, and actually it turns out to be a question for you, right? So if people come to a fund, or yours is a little different, but if people come to a fund as an early stage entrepreneur, like most of the people in the audience, the question is, what is make it the likelihood of success versus agony in terms of getting a yes and some money? And I think that most entrepreneurs don't, and I didn't to start for sure, most entrepreneurs don't think of presenting it or evaluating it the way that the VC needs to evaluate it, in terms of unmet clinical need, clinical risk, reimbursement risk, engineering risk, whatever. Everybody says, I have a better widget, let's go shop the widget.
Well, I think the forward lens is more important than the rear view mirror. Past performance is not a predictor of future success when it comes to exits. Actually, my least favorite slide in any deck is the one that talks about the historical exits in the space.
Right.
Totally irrelevant at this point, because we've heard stories today about how some of those exits, the biggest ones, don't always work out the way they're expected, and the need to have an organization like a Medtronic commit and recommit and do its own adaptation. So I think that the problem solving for your eventual partner or buyer is something we talked about yesterday in a panel that's critically important. And I'll bring it back to you, Chris. You guys are thinking creatively about how to empower, you did a lot of creative thinking at Medtronic about how to empower the future through out-of-the-box financial engineering. Our collaboration brings a lot of people resources and ingenuity to it. I guess, thinking about some of the transactions you did more recently, what has you most excited about where that creative thinking, creative work, deals like, let's say, CathWorks, things that you also did creatively that have really worked out, like Mazor, the future for Medtronic in the industry of thinking differently so that we can reduce the pain points and have more successes? What has you most excited about the future there?
I'm going to answer your question, but I have to tell you a funny story, because
I like your stories.
Investment bankers make the trip to see people that run corporate development all the time, and they'll show that page that you hate, right? The preceding comp page. And, inevitably on the left side is Ardian. And it's like an IQ test failure. And you kind of look at them, you got to be fucking kidding me. You're showing me that this is like this great comp for something that we've paid for 3 or 4 times. We're at the back end of like running the second trial. We might need to run a third. We don't have any reimbursement. It happened before I was born. And that's your comp. Just so annoying. So I'm glad I don't have to have those meetings anymore.
Okay.
Oh God, did I forget your question? No.
I'm gonna bring you back to what are you excited about for the future? We have to leave this panel, this discussion with hope.
Look, the number one thing I would tell you is that on a quantitative basis, the single largest driver of value for large cap strategics is revenue growth, right? It's, you do your statistical correlation, it's a 90% on the R squared when you look at it. Like, what are the things that drive it? It's revenue growth, it's gross margin expansion, and everything else has no correlation. They're down in the 50s, right? So, if you want to know like why strategics are always going to be in the market for it, is that because if you buy something that's high growth, you get your value back plus. And anything that's accretive to, the denominator and the numerator for that math is it's a good thing. So, and that means that if you're out and you're a startup and you're addressing a big market and, it projects high growth and it's solving problems and improving outcomes, there's going to be a market for that. And then you got to figure out a lot of the stuff that Howard said, right? Which is, where do we fit in the scheme of things? Where are we with respect to the timing on the introduction of the product? Will we be first? Are we a fast follower, or are we, someone that's out there? And I think the calculus gets more complicated when you take away the IPO market and you take away companies that can't, in the absence of strategic interest, take the company all the way out and do it themselves. And the best example of that is probably Shockwave, where they didn't get the value that they wanted, and they fundamentally believed that they could do better for reimbursement than people gave them credit for, and they could do better for indication expansion than people gave them credit for. So they had to go do it themselves, and they're going to get 10x on that investment by holding
Execution's
it.
pretty extraordinary.
It really
when
matters.
it works, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting because I'm listening to, I learn a lot by listening to Chris and how to position things for strategics. But if I'm trying to position things for VCs early on, the currency that you need to do is, in the ideal world, in order of priority, it's clinical data, therapeutic magic, at least freedom to operate in some good plan that could lead to IP, and a mechanism of action that's believable. Because if you have a mechanism of action that's believable and you have something to support it either preclinically or ideally clinically, it doesn't mean you're going to get money, it means you're going to get listened to. And the more times you get listened to, the more chance you have of getting funded and avoiding agony.
I want to take this last minute just to think about a frontier that you've spent probably more time in terms of innovation than anyone I know, which is heart failure. I think one of the great areas of unmet need is heart failure, and you've been a prolific inventor there. And Chris, I know you guys continue to look at and are continue to develop new therapies in that area. Howard, talk about the future of heart failure therapy just for the last minute, and where you see that frontier in terms of creating impact and creating solutions for patients that really suffer.
So we're going to see how V-Wave reads out in a couple weeks, right? The issue...
Another fast follower area.
Yeah. So I think heart failure is... heart failure is just such a huge unmet need. In one sense, and in another sense, it's almost like nobody's been able to crack the code and stuff. So I think if somebody's eventually able to crack the code, we've got the early stage stuff, beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, diuretics, Entresto, whatever, work pretty well in that up to maybe class 3A, right at the beginning of starting to get bad. Way at the end, we're pretty good. We can put in a VAD, we can transplant people, we can save those people. There's a huge group in the middle that we just don't have the answer for. We don't have the answer for HFpEF, or we'll find out at ACC. But right now there's a huge opportunity, but it's, as you say, it's a huge risk. If you can crack that code and find out what it is, you're a big winner. And so you have to decide, am I going to do something that's more, that there's already some information for and try and hang my hat on that in a fast follower thing, or am I going to try and go pie in the sky novel and do it? But it's a big thing. Do you think that strategics still consider heart failure a big area, and is it interventional or?
But it's a big area for venture at this point, right? I mean, it's so appealing because it's big. If you get one, it's a lottery ticket. But the operating theory for a venture program is I can't just invest in one. I've got to invest in 5, and spread the risk and be early, and try to stay small until I get a signal. So everyone is looking forward to the initial readout in the next couple of weeks for sure.
Well, a lot more we could discuss, but great spending the morning with you guys, and thank you guys for showing up. We enjoyed the discussion. Take care.
Thank you.